If you've been thinking about using Figma in 2021, this will be the perfect video to get you confident and up to scratch to get started with this powerful software for UI and UX designers. Let's get right into it. All right, let's get right into it. No time to waste. Before we get into creating a new project, I just want to say Figma has released a new section called Community. It's in beta right now. It's just a wall of free resources for you to get instant access to. So if you hit on Community, if you want to find some 3D shapes for your project, double click on this item, hit duplicate, open up in a new window, and you get literally instant access to all these resources that people have created that you can use in your project right away. So, looking for freebies, head over to Community. Without further ado, let's get into explaining to you and giving you a rundown of how Figma's set up. So, shared projects, you'll notice it's here. Shared projects is really when another team has invited your very own team into a specific project and it becomes shared, hence the name, shared projects. However, it gets clustered and it gets organized in its own different section. Below that, I have a section for clients. I've created a new team just for all my clients, and I've also created a new team for all my personal projects as well. So let's head into YouTube Domination Demo. And obviously this is a project and I'm gonna create a file within it. Clicking on New File takes me right into the place, my little abode of where I am going to be changing the world. And this is where you'll be changing the world in 2021 by designing some of the world-class experiences for the world to use. So, 3 sections that you need to understand. You've got the menu bar up here, you've got the left menu bar, and then you've got the right menu bar. It's going to be very simple, and we're going to get through all this in a couple of minutes. So, what I want to do is I want to focus on the key areas because I know a lot of this stuff is fairly basic and you probably already have experience or knowledge about this. But hitting the delicious burger menu, what I want to take note is the save local copy. Now, this Figma allows you to save your entire project, this project that you have opened up into a local file that will be a .fig file. What that means is when you send it to a client, they'll be able to download that file, upload it to Figma, and they'll have direct access, and they'll have the source file. The reason why I like to do that instead of having to give them access to the file forever is because I would need to pay for their membership every single month. And I don't want to do that when the project is complete and I'm happy to send them the raw source file. So take note of that. Everything else is quite self-explanatory, not gonna waste your time. So you've got your move tool, you've got your scale tool, these are quite standard. If you've used any other programs such as Illustrator and it's your first time using Figma, we have a frame, which is pretty much, in other words, an artboard. So you can hit F on your keyboard or you select it from the menu. And on the right-hand side, you'll notice that we have a number of starting templates that we can work from. So let's say we want to do a desktop application. Then we've got the 1440 by the 1024, which is my favorite starting point for every web project. Now on the right of that, you have all your shapes. So simply remembering the keyboard shortcuts is a great way, or you can select it from the menu. So the good thing about Figma is you can quickly adjust the border radiuses on these shapes by simply hovering and clicking on the little nodes. Or if you want to get the ellipse, you can also create very quick pie charts by clicking on this node. That's pretty cool. And then you have the pen tool. Everyone's used the pen tool before. You can create these wobbly shapes that designers love and think are in trend all year round. This is probably the best blob that I've ever created. I'm kidding, don't judge. And then you've got your text tool. Everyone knows about the text tool, no need to go through that. The hand tool is what I prefer. I like to just hold down space on the keyboard to move around a specific canvas. It's just a lot easier than having to click on this little icon up here. Now, let's say we've created a beautiful logo for this client and we've made it really big because they just keep asking us to make it bigger and bigger. We can let the client know by clicking on the comment icon or C on the keyboard, clicking on the shape, and we can tell the client, who in other words is Michael here, that this logo is already big enough How much more bigger do you want it? Emoji face. You can pick a little emoji and you can post it. Now, they'll get a notification, and when they want to respond, they can respond it, and when it's done, they can click the resolve comment. Now, you're probably thinking, "Ooh, where did that comment go? Where did it disappear to? This is some sort of dark art sorcery." Well, up here in the little drop down, you can click on this little drop down and you can show resolved comments. Trust me, if you're new to Figma, you will miss that and it will frustrate you. So that's where you'll find all your resolved comments. Now, on the left side in this menu, it is where you manage all your artboards, your frames and all your layers. Very standard. So let's say we've got a couple layers, you can manage them all here. You can hit Command D on your keyboard to duplicate this actual frame, and you can see that it's now duplicated, which is great. Assets. This is where you manage all your components and design systems, right? When you first start out as a designer, it's probably quite empty, but as you start to spend more and more time on Figma, it gets very, very complex and it gets very, very heavy. So, for example, let's say I've created this new project. For me, in my design process, I have my very own design system. I can turn that design system on and it gives me instant access to all my little buttons and components that I've created. So I can head over to search for button, and I can drag and drop. There we go. And it just makes it very, very simple. So we'll have a video, don't worry, we'll have a video to go through all this in detail, but this is just to give you a high level overview of what this capability, what Figma has for you to use. So that's pretty much it. Then on the right hand side, we have the share icon. So, well, let's talk about this little icon here. This is me. And Figma has a reputation and was sort of renowned for their live collaboration functionality when they first started out. The more people that are part of this file, the more bubbles that will pop up. So let's just quickly open up my Figma and sort of local application. Let's go into this file here. You will notice that you will now see Michael here. That is my twin, right? My twin is in my file and he's gonna start messing some stuff up. So let's just make this a little bit smaller. He's gonna start messing some stuff up and I should be able to see his cursor here. Now, let's say I wanna see what he's doing. I can actually click on his, there we go. I can click on his actual icon. I can see the view, the actual view that he is in. So it's very useful when you're collaborating with another designer. Probably less useful if you're gonna give access to your client. Now, one thing that I always try to avoid is giving edit or view access to a client within this view. The only view I give them access to is actually the present preview mode. Because the reason why is I don't want my clients to go in and start giving me feedback on my specific designs when they're still in work in progress. I share this prototype, this view, through here to share it with them, because then they can only see what I want to present them with, if that makes sense. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a little hack that I have in my process. Now, here we have the zoom. So these are very standard zoom in, zoom outs, and you can obviously share this design file with other designers or people in your team. So here are some of the design settings. Now on the right hand side, you'll see design, prototype, and inspect. Now, if you're a designer, design and prototype is probably more than enough for you. If you're a bit of a code wrangler and you like to write some code, or you're actually working with some developers, or you're a developer yourself, then the inspect will also work will be very useful for you. They provide CSS, iOS, and Android sort of component styles that you can grab really quickly from here. And depending on how you want to view it, you can toggle it from here. So without further ado, let's go into the design aspect. So let's click on this frame. We'll click on our first frame, and you can see there is an array of different options that we can have. So obviously, you guys have probably know what the alignment tools do. You can make your shapes dance around. So left, center, right, top, middle, bottom, and you can see that move around quite quickly. So fairly simple. You've also got your X and Y axes that you can toggle here. You've also got your width and height that you can toggle the shape, or you can actually just hold down Shift and you can drag this shape to make it larger or smaller and keeping the same aspect ratio. You've also got the rotation and you've also got your border radius. If you want to create individual border radiuses for the shape and make it very wonky and sloppy, then you surely can with this item here. So let's delete that. You will notice that when I click on this frame, there's also an auto layout feature. We will have a video where we go deep dive into the auto layout feature because there is quite a bit to cover in there. But for example, let's say we have a list of items that we want to create, and over time things get a little bit messy, and we know for a fact that there is not much more to each item than just a rectangle. It could be like if they're just repeated items. You can highlight and select all these items and you can hit Shift A on the keyboard. Hold on, let's just quickly, Shift A on the keyboard, and that will turn them all into an auto layout component. You will notice that there's a double bar here. You'll see that all the items are within. Now what this does is it gives you some of these complex settings that you can very quickly customize these items in a very systematic way. So obviously the direction is set to vertical right now. If I set to horizontal, it will set to horizontal. I can also adjust the spacing systematically. I can also adjust the padding. So notice that the bounding box of these elements is flushed right to the edges of this shape. If I increase the padding, just like CSS, it adds space within. So it doesn't make it larger, it actually doesn't spread it out, it's actually adding more padding, and it stays within that same spot that it was in before. So if I hit there, you can notice that the left and right doesn't really move, it's just pushing everything out. Now you can also adjust where you want to position the elements. So let's say, I'm just going to very quickly show you this example. We'll cover this in another video, but I've made the bounding box of this frame much larger. I can actually start to move these components inside in a very systematic way as well. So very quickly, I'm able to produce some very highly tactical UI components without doing too much manual moving around. It's all done within the auto layout component. Now, sounds good. The next thing that I want to show you that is going to come up is the layout, not the layout grid. Let me just quickly put down a example component here, is the constraints. Now, here we have an example header, right? Let's imagine this is a header and we're going to have a logo inside. It's a very standard component. There we go. The most beautiful red you've ever seen. And we'll group these two components together. So we can hit Command G on an Apple keyboard. And traditionally, if we wanted to create a responsive header, so that if we were to make this canvas larger, we would have to manually go in and stretch it. And it would also stretch the inside a little bit, and it just gets very, very messy. Now, what Figma has allowed us to do is we can grab this component, we can actually, on the horizontal axes, we can set it to flush to the left and the right of the parent frame. So this would be called the parent frame, and elements inside are called the child object. So remember that. So this child object is now flush to the left and right, and it's also flush to the top on the vertical axes. So what this does, and before I do that, let's just show you, for example, it will start to stretch everything left and make sure it sticks to the left and right, and it keeps the same aspect ratio as when it started. Make sense? But obviously, if we're designing responsive elements, we don't want the logo to be stretching it as well. We want to make sure the logo stays the same. So we've set the constraints for the parent component. Now, if we go in and we select the logo, what we can do is we can change the left and right on the horizontal axes to left, and then we can make sure that that's the same. And then now, if you double check, the logo is set to left and the top, the rectangle's left, right, and the top. So if we grab this, zoom out, and we grab this artboard, then ta-da! We can create mobile, tablet, desktop experiences with a simple dragging of the canvas. I'm sorry to say, it's not that easy, but hopefully this gives you a fundamentally good understanding of like how we can achieve very quick responsive templates within Figma. Obviously, as we get more and more complex with more UI components, the nesting of these components and the constraints system will get a little bit more complicated, but it's not rocket science. All right, so we're nearly there. Let's go through. If you click on your actual frame itself, you can also add a grid or a grid system or a layout system. So obviously when we're designing for responsive desktop, tablet, and mobile screens, we want some sort of layout that we can follow by. So simply hitting the plus icon here, you can either get a grid, you can create this as a 8-point grid. So by simply clicking on the icon, changing the size to 8, you can use 8-point grids if you like to have a vertical sort of grid system, a grid flow, or you can change it to a column. So by clicking on the drop down columns, you can change this to, let's say, fixed, centered, and I want a width of maybe 80, and whoops, I forgot to count. 12 column grid, 80, gutters are 20, so there we go. So you can create grids, you can create layouts very, very quickly. Now, what else is there to go through? Then we obviously have the layers settings. Similar to Photoshop, every other design sort of application, you can adjust the layer setting to darken, lighten, overlay, and this just creates different sort of manipulations of a photo. So very, very simple. And then let's just click on this. And then we have your filling components. So let's just say we'll grab this little, let's actually turn this layer off. Here we go. And then we have, let's just say this is a logo. You can actually click on this color and you can toggle between a solid color, linear gradient, radial gradients, also do an image as well. So there we go. So really this is a very just simple standard way to fill a shape. You can also add multiple layers within this fill. So obviously you can have a base color, you can add a linear gradient on top. So that's actually quite useful, and then you can adjust them individually, which is very useful, especially when you have multiple components and like all these different styles of buttons. You can actually do quite some advanced things with this as you move forward. Similar to the fill, you also have a stroke. Very standard, you can set the color, you can set the width, how you want to position the stroke, centered inside or outside. So you will notice it actually makes a little bit of difference on the width. Clicking on the 3-dot little worm thing, you can change the cap. So you can either keep it a little bit rounded, sharp, or blunt. And you can also create dashed lines as well. So that's very useful. Now, in terms of your effects, there are 4 different effects that you can create. You can add an inner shadow, so you can see a little inner shadow there. Clicking on the icon will give you ability to adjust this as well. So you can increase the blur, and you can turn up the opacity. Beautiful button, reminds me of the early 2000s. Then you can also make a drop shadow as well. There we go. If you want to have a inner shadow and a drop shadow, you can hit the plus icon, and there we go. What else do we have here? We can also do a layer blur. So that actually blurs the layer. We can't really blur, you won't really see the difference, but it will blur the layer. And then also you can do a background blur. So let me show you the background blur. Let's just go in and say Mizco loves his fans. We've got some text here, and let's say we want to do a frosted look. We can go and hit R on our keyboard. You can make a quick shape, make it white. You can go to your effects, turn this to background blur. And the mistake that I used to make here is I would change the opacity of the layer settings. Don't do the Mizco mistake. Go to your fill and change the opacity on your fill, and that will be able to give you a frosted look. So you can increase the blur by changing and toggling the background blur setting here. And then obviously when you're ready to export this beautiful, beautiful, juicy red button that is going to give you 100% conversion rate, head over to your export. You can change the export size. You can get a really big one if you want. Let's go 4 times because we're going to get huge gains in 2021. You can change the different outputs, so PNG, JPEG, SVG, or PDF. And pretty much that is it. You can see a little quick preview and you can export out the icon, the button, sorry. And obviously, there you go. So hopefully that gives you a very, very quick rundown and good understanding of how you can use Figma and the potential of it. And I will definitely be following up with a number of different videos of how you can create the perfect topography scale. You started to build your very first design system. How can you utilize variants, which is a new Figma tool. So make sure to like and subscribe to this video so you can get the latest updates and videos about Figma's new features. All right, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you in another video very, very soon.